As a Framer expert, I help more than 100 beginners through support sessions, and I keep seeing the same pattern. They build their entire site only to discover it completely breaks when used on different devices. In fact, 90% of them had to rebuild their projects from complete scratch, and I don't want to see the same thing happen to you. So in this quick video, I'll show you how exactly to set up your Framer project the right way from the start. You'll learn the essential building blocks for a rock-solid, responsive site, everything my students wish they knew on day one. We'll discover breakpoints, master the stack system, and learn the site structure that guarantees responsiveness. So before jumping into the first section, let me introduce myself. My name is Nandi. This is Framer University, and let's get started. So here we are in Framer, we have a blank project. This is probably what you see when you create a new project. The first thing that you always have to do is to add your breakpoints, because if you start designing here, then your website will only have a desktop version. But as you know, people use their phones and tablets to view these different websites. So we have to click here on the desktop breakpoint that was generated when you created the project, and on the top right you can click breakpoint to add a tablet and a phone breakpoint. It's that simple. Now if you put something in the primary desktop breakpoint, it will also appear on the phone, and if something needs to be adjusted, you can make overrides to these elements here, and so this little rectangle will be a little bit smaller on phone. However, this is not going to be the way that we optimize things for tablet and mobile. Many beginners just try assembling something here and then overriding a bunch of stuff on phone and tablet, but there's a site structure that we're going to talk about in this video a little bit later that allows you to have just one or two simple adjustments that you do on phone and tablet, and you're good to go. So we have the 3 breakpoints, and now the next step is to turn it into a stack. So the primary desktop breakpoint on the right panel will be turned into stack by clicking this layout button. So you can see it has this layout section here, and it has a plus button. We can just click that. And now, as you can see, this is a stack right here. But you might ask, what is a stack? Well, to understand what is a stack, I'm going to first remove this layout. So this is going to be a simple frame, not a stack. I'm going to show you what we see when we start building websites by default. So you can see that I have this little text layer here. I could just press T on my keyboard, click on the canvas and start writing and then adjusting the properties on the right panel, but I already have it here. So I'm going to just drag and drop it onto this desktop breakpoint. You can see by default, this element is absolutely positioned. You can see in the right panel, it's type absolute, and I can position it anywhere freely. I can move it around. Many beginners start assembling their site with these absolute position elements because it looks very simple. You can just put anything anywhere, and yeah, it just looks like a simple way of building sites. However, you'll soon notice that this is not really great. Let's just say we have another text here, which could be a little bit smaller, like a description or something. I'm going to make it a little bit different in terms of color as well. And the problem with these absolutely positioned layers is that, for example, if we change this title and we make it 2 lines, you can see that this layer here is not really adopting. It's not really moving down automatically. I have to literally grab it and put it there. And every single time I make a change like this, I have to reposition everything. And that's not really great. So we can clearly see the absolute position can seem like a convenient choice at first, but later we can realize that this is not going to be good for us on the long term when we actually want to build responsive sites. So this is where relative positioning comes in, because that is a great solution for this issue. If I select these layers and I try changing the position to absolute, or sorry, from absolute to relative, I cannot really do that. It's grayed out. And this is where stacks come in, because if you remember, I started talking about what is a stack. Well, a stack is a frame that can also hold a relative position elements. Because now the desktop is a simple frame, it's not a stack, so everything within is either absolute or fixed in this case. So in order to set these to relative, I have to turn the desktop into a stack. So if I click here to layout again, now you can see that the start building in Framer and the smaller start building in Framer are both now jumped to their relative position. You can see on the right panel, they are now relatively positioned. Now that the desktop is a stack, that doesn't mean that we can only have relative position elements within. If I create a little square here, by default, it's going to have relative position because we are putting it within a frame that is a stack. However, I can still decide that, okay, I want to have this square as an absolute position element and I want to be able to move it anywhere. However, it's really important to mention here that you're not really going to use absolute that much. So you're going to be able to do most things with relative position elements, and you should do it. You should try to strive for building sites with relative position elements, but in some cases we're going to have absolute. You can see that now, okay, we have a stack, it has a few relative elements and it has an absolute element. Absolute element can be positioned anywhere, and relative positioned cannot really be positioned anywhere. I'm trying to put this star building and framer here, and I cannot really do that. However, I can reorder these texts, as you can see, these relative elements, and I can also break this into two lines, and you can see that the star building and framer here below nicely adopts. So this behavior is already looking much better. But what do we do when we want to put this right here? Well, this is where we have to talk about the stack settings, because you can clearly see that this frame right here can be positioned anywhere, but these cannot be positioned anywhere. Why? Because the relative elements are following the stack settings, the rules, and the absolute position elements are kind of like rebels. They are not really following the rules. Relative elements are good citizens. They are following the rules. But where can we set these rules or settings? Well, it's usually set on the parent frame of these elements. So in this case, we have these elements here. The parent frame is the desktop, so I'm going to click that. In the right panel, under layout, we have all the settings for this stack. So you can see, for example, now the distribute is set to start. This means that now everything will start at the top because the direction is vertical. So if I want to center these two texts, I just have to set it to center. If I want to have more gap between them, I can just change the gap. If I want to align them to the left, to the right, or to the center, I can also do that. And yeah, you can just play around with these different settings yourself to see how you can reposition the relative elements inside of a stack really easily. And it's always better to come up with a way of tweaking these stack settings to achieve the position that you need. So for example, if you want to position these stacks here to the bottom left, you're not going to set it to absolute and put it right here, because that's just not the way. You're going to find a way to tweak these settings on the right, under layout, on the parent frame, to make it move down to the bottom left corner. And then if you're like, oh yeah, but it's a little bit close to the edges, well then you can just add padding, and you can see padding is added all around, pushes the content a little bit inside. And I can also change the gap, and now we have the layout that we wanted to have. Okay, so let's remove this little square here, and let me show you something else. Stack and relative positioning is not only great for these type of things that we can reorder these, we can add more, and everything is nicely getting pushed away and nothing is overlapping, because we can also set different sizing options on these relative elements. So by default, if we have these two text layers on width fit, as you can see, if I select them on the top right, both of them are width fit, so they are just fitting the content within themselves. Then if we resize the window here, you can see that it's just going to cut off on smaller devices. It's not really going to break into new lines. However, now that these are relatively positioned, we can set the width to a type called fill, which will basically fill up the available space. And if I set this on both of these text layers, you're going to see that as I start adjusting this breakpoint, they're nicely breaking into multiple lines, creating this nice responsive layout. And we not only get that fill option for the width, but we also get fit for the height, which is really useful. Let me show you with an example. If I wrap these two text layers in a stack, and then I change the stack background to a little bit different of a color, and then I add some padding within, you're going to be able to see that now this stack that I just wrapped these two text layers in is set to height fit. If this wasn't a stack, I could only use fixed. And I'm going to show you why fixed is not a great option. You can see that now if I start resizing, the text will start growing. It will break into multiple lines, making its height a little bit higher, but the parent frame, this stack that we created, is not adapting. It's just staying on a fixed height. And this is why fit is really useful, because if we have fit content height, it will always fit the content inside. And as you can see, as the text gets higher, the stack is also growing with it. And this is really cool because what we're going to be able to do is we're going to be able to set this on the desktop breakpoint itself. So now that the desktop breakpoint is a stack, we can set height to fit content. So as we add different sections within, it will nicely adapt and grow, and we don't have to like manually set the height to like a fixed value as we add more and more content. I still have to mention though that if you want to have an absolute position element within a stack, you can still have that in a way that it's nice and responsive. Now let's say that I want to move this frame to the top right corner, and I want to make sure that it stays there responsively. Now by default, as you can see, it's not really doing that. It just seems like it's moving randomly. So what you have to utilize when you want to make these absolute position elements kind of responsive, that you have to look on the top right when you select these frames, and for absolute position, you have these pins on top of this type. And you can see that now the left and the top pin is activated. The top is set to 35 and the left is set to over 1000. This basically means that this element now will keep 35 pixels from the top and 1033 pixels from the left. So if you think about it, we can deactivate this left pin, set this to 44, the right one to 44 as well, so now top and right is activated, and it will nicely keep the same space from the top and from the right, meaning that it will just, stay in the top right corner. So yeah, you can use absolute in a responsive way, but you're gonna have to try to build everything with relative position elements. Okay, so now that we know this, this is really good. You can soon start building sites in Framer. Let me show you just one more thing, which is site structure that you can start following. Because if you follow that, I can guarantee you that you're not gonna have to like rebuild everything from scratch, like many of my students had to, because it's just a great site structure. So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna remove everything from this desktop breakpoint, and I'm gonna quickly sketch it out for you. So within the desktop, we usually set the stack settings on the desktop to vertical direction, distribute start, center alignment, gap 0, and padding 0. So this is the stack settings that we need here. The reason why we set this is because then if we add a frame within, it will nicely start from the top, as you can see, and it stays centered. And this is exactly what we need. We're gonna put sections right below each other starting from the top, so it makes total sense. But this first frame is not going to be like a section yet, because how websites are usually structured is that they have a main container within the desktop, and then within that main container we have all of the sections. So main frame is created. We can also use accessibility tags on the right to set the main tag on the main frame, and then we can also turn it into a stack. Really important, most of the frames that you create in Framer that have elements nested within, and this main container will have sections within. So all of the frames that will contain elements need to be stacks. And what we also do most of the time is we set these frames to fill a width. So this is just something that you can try to get used to, that when you drew a frame, you just set it to width fill by default. In case that you don't need that later, you can set it back to some other option, but by default, it should be like a thing that you just do. Now on the main container, we can set the same settings: vertical direction, distribute start, gap 0. And then I can just set the desktop to fit height. So now it will fit the content within, which is this main container, which is still height fixed, but we're gonna set it to fit when we have some content within that we can fit. So I'm gonna remove its color because we don't really need that, and I'll just press F on my keyboard and draw another frame within, which will be called a section. So this will be our section frame where we can start assembling, the content of the section. This section will also be with fill, and I'll also turn it into a stack. Let me show you what happens if I don't set it to fill. You can see even though the main is set to with fill, this frame within will not be growing with the page. And this is not really cool because it will like cut off right here, as you can see. That's why most frames, as I said, will have to have with fill. So both the main and the section within, and if I'm actually going to make some additional frames within, those are going to be fill as well. So section is created, it's a layout, perfect. We can maybe set the direction to vertical, that makes a little bit more sense. With fill, okay, and then I'll remove the fill color, we don't need that. And then now we can set the main to height fit content, and accessibility tag section can be added to the section frame. This is just so that the browsers know that like the main frame on your page is actually the main container. That's where like the search engine can find all the content and stuff like that. So it just helps basically your SEO performance on Google and other search engines. Okay, so now we have this section within the main container. I can set its height to 800 for now. And you might think that I'll just start putting elements within here and like assemble the section content here, but no, that's not what I'm gonna do, because we're gonna create another frame within the section that is going to be called content. So all the content that goes inside of the section will be placed within the content frame. So this content frame is set to with fill, and the height will change probably to fit content a little bit later. And let me just show you what this does now. It just makes this content always fill up the available space within the viewport. But actually this is not really what I want, because my sites usually, if you just take a look at Framer University, you can see that it has kind of like a max of it, so it doesn't really grow bigger than a certain size. As you can see, we have some breathing room on the left and on the right. So with this content frame, we can achieve just that. We can apply a max width on this content frame so it doesn't grow bigger than a certain size. So I select the content frame and I apply max width, maybe 1100 pixel on it. And now you're going to see that on smaller sizes, it's nicely adapting. Actually, it's not getting cut off. It's a little bit confusing because it could actually, if it was cutting off, it would look the same, but it's actually adapting to the width of the page. And if our viewport is a little bit bigger than 1100 width, it's gonna stop there and will not grow bigger than that. Perfect. So the content, of course, will also be stack, vertical direction, and I think I can also remove the fill color because we don't really need that here. Okay, so now let's paste in some content within this content frame. So as you can see now, we have the content frame and then some text and buttons within, which is exactly what we need. And now that we have this, we can set the content to a height fit content, so it fits the content within, and I can set the section to fit height as well. However, now we're gonna notice something really weird. We don't really have breathing room around. So if I duplicate these sections, they're going to be really like close to each other. And you can also see that as I start adjusting the width of this website, in some cases, these letters are actually touching the right and left edges or sides of the website, which is not really cool. So the way we fix this is by setting padding on the section frame and the content frame. So usually I set top and bottom padding on the section frame. So I select the section frame on the left and add top and bottom padding. I usually set it to 100 on the top and 100 on the bottom, but you can play around with different values. And then on the content frame, to make sure that it doesn't touch the sides of the website, we can apply 20 padding on the left and 20 padding on the right. I use 2020 because then it works great on all devices. I don't have to override it on phone or anything. So yeah, this is a great setup. And now if I duplicate these sections, you can see that they are nicely spaced out. And if I start adjusting this, you're going to see that these text layers will no longer touch the sides of the website. So yeah, it looks pretty cool. So basically, if you follow these rules, you can go from a website that looks like this, not so cool. As you can see, it's a big mess, because everything is assembled with absolute positioning. Everything is like freely movable, and you might think that, oh yeah, it's cool, like I designed it, it looks great here on the desktop Breakpoint, but then on all other devices it's not really cool. And the problem with this is that you actually have to rebuild it from scratch. You have to restructure it because you cannot really fix it in other ways. You just have to build it with the right structure. So we went from this to something like this, a site that has a great structure. As you can see on the left, layers panel, main, hero, section, content frames within, and most frames are relative, set to width fill and fit height. As you can see, everything is just nicely responsive. And also because of this structure, it just makes it really easy to reorder these sections. So as you can see, we have 3 sections here, the hero, these logos, and this little bento grid. If I want to put the bento grid to the top, I can just reorder the elements within the main container, because all of these are relative elements. So I can just press the top arrow key, and now it's on the top. Really, really cool. One extra thing I want to mention here is that we have the main container. Every section will be within the main, except 2 elements, the navigation, because it's not part of the main container. So the navigation will be outside somewhere right here. And then the footer will be also outside and on the bottom. So this is what you have to also pay attention to. So again, just to sum up everything, in order to have a great website that you don't have to rebuild, you have to make sure to understand what is relative positioning, what is absolute positioning, what is stacks, and you have to make sure that all the elements that you create are going to be actually relatively positioned, and then the width on most frames are going to be set to a fill option. It's going to be a stack, and probably it's going to have fit height, so it fits the content within responsively. And you also have to follow the size structure that I showcased. So you have the breakpoint, a main container, then sections within, and then within the sections we have the content frame that has a max width, so your website will not grow like really wide on like a large monitor. One exception for the fail width could be buttons, because when we design buttons, we want to make sure that the width of the button is actually fitting the text within. So as you can see, this setup right here allows me to change the text within, and the button adapts. So I just want to show you with this example is that not everything will be fail width, but like 90% of the cases you're going to have width set to fail. But yeah, again, if you have a little stack for the button and then text within, both the text within and the stack that wraps it, the button itself, will be set to fit content, and then some padding to have breathing room around. And this will allow you to make a nice, flexible, responsive button that can be customized easily, and the width is always changing. But this is just an exception. So if you follow all of these rules, you're gonna be good. You can now start building your own website. Try to, maybe if you have a design in Figma, try to make sure that like you find a way to do that sort of layout that you want with relative positioning and with stacks and with really little use of absolute positioning. If you don't have a design already, you can go and look on like different websites that you enjoy or like, and just try recreating certain sections from that with absolute positioning, without absolute positioning, and with stacks and relative positioning, to kind of like practice all these options that it has, like the alignment, distribute, direction, padding, and stuff like that. So yeah, that's it for this video. Make sure to check out framer.university for cool resources for Framer and other tutorials and stuff like that. If you're just starting out with Framer, or you're already like learning it or building sites with it, I think it's gonna be a cool little resource for you. So yeah, that's for this video. Make sure to like it, subscribe for more, and I'm gonna see you in the next one.